Okay, well, I've got 4 o'clock. So Karen and I just want to thank you all so much for giving up your time. We know how very busy you are, and we know that your time is precious. So thank you for sharing this 30-minute brief presentation with us on faculty flows. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Laura Faulcon, and I'm the Director of Career Exploration and Development. And my co-facilitator is
Karen Layou. This year I'm serving as the Reynolds Presidential Faculty Fellow. I'm working with CETL, our Center for Teaching and Learning, and for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. And it's been a pleasure to work with Laura over the last semester and now going into spring semester, talking about these different ways that faculty can build soft skills into our classrooms. Quite frankly, most of us are probably doing this already, but I think these are a great way to highlight ways that we can sort of emphasize these skills as we continue to move forward, exploring these different competencies.
excellent. Thank you. So this is brief, but please interrupt us at any time. We love the interaction. Feel free to put comments in the chat, or Karen and I like to go back and forth with commentary. But if you, like I said, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We've gone through the first 4 competencies in the fall, and today starts the 5th of 8 total competencies based on the NACE competencies for careers. You might be wondering, what is NACE? What is this that she always talks about and it's in my monthly newsletters? NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and it's the leading research-based organization to not only help students find their job of choice or their career of choice when they graduate, but it also helps students find employment for a longer period of time and help students get promoted in their career of choice. It's also data based, not only research based, but we look at this research all the time to make sure that we're up on best practices. I always incorporate this information in those newsletters. Now we also have an Instagram. I like to include tips and tricks. All of the information is online, so you're welcome to take a look at that at any point also. So these 4 competencies we referenced in the fall, and as I mentioned today, we are starting with leadership. And leadership is very broad strokes, and some of it might seem like common sense to you. I hope that it does. We definitely don't want to be speaking to you in any way other than collegial, but I'm coming from the employer perspective. My experience prior to Reynolds was on hiring panels. I supervised large teams, but I also helped students prepare for the workforce. And Karen is coming from your colleague perspective here at Reynolds. So moving into leadership, as we mentioned, we talked about the first 4, and today, here's leadership. At the bottom, you'll see a link to all of the career competencies, if you'd like to take a look at those at another time. So again, session 5 of 8. Just a quick graphic. Obviously, to be a leader, you always want to be learning and growing. Quick question for the group. Do you need a title to be a leader? Thank you. Okay, I see some heads shaking back and forth.
Nope.
Good. Yeah, we also agree. Definitely do not need a title. We believe, as does NACE, that anyone can demonstrate leadership skills regardless of their place in life, whether they're a student, whether they're any age, at any stage in their career development. And then along with this, what are your thoughts? What about those with leader titles? Does that mean that they're a natural born leader? I didn't want to get too controversial here.
Hopefully it means that they've been building their skills to a point where they're recognized, but it's not always the case.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you're right. Hopefully. And I just wanted to kind of leave it just like that. We can think of people maybe that we've known in life, in our own personal life, or perhaps people that we've seen on the news or in history, perhaps with titles, but maybe don't demonstrate our traditional leadership roles. And so with this, we want to kind of dive right in.
Real quick, Laura, I just want to say
Yes.
one thing.
Please.
Many times leadership falls to you, right? And so I think that's another thing that we see with students is that sometimes they are, oh, they're the one of the few people in the club. So then, oh, you're president now. And so the idea is, I think we've all had that experience of like, oh, I'm in charge of this now. Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
True.
Healthcare is the same way. The last man standing, the oldest one that it didn't leave yet, then they get appointed a lot of times because they have the most seniority of everybody.
Yes. Yeah, I have a real life example for that too. As a parent, I went to a meeting at my child's school, literally just for information. And I went out of there as a vice president of something. And I said, I just came once just for information. And so interesting how these titles befall upon us and we may or may not have expressed any interest. But according to NACE, this is how they define leadership. So you all can take a look at that. Any thoughts on that?
Or perhaps think about like what words stand out to you in the definition here.
A leader needs a team.
Great point. Great point.
Capitalize speaks out to me.
Okay.
I like the emphasis on strengths.
Yes. I also like goals.
Recognize is a big one. A lot of people fail to be good leaders because they don't recognize or talk to the employees about that they're doing a good job. So recognizing those things and talking to them about them.
Very good. Very good. I like that you all pointed out each individual part of that. That's great. Okay, thank you for that. Just letting a few more people into the room here. Okay. So these are just a few sample behaviors according to NACE. And we'd like to throw this out for discussion here. And again, most of it is common sense, but thinking about the work that you all do with students, you can probably think of how this applies in your classroom with students, how you are developing student leadership qualities. Coming from the employer perspective, I can share with you some of those insights, but I'll let you digest this for just a moment.
So again, Laura, these are things that employers are looking for.
Yes. But I would follow that with how many faculty on here are developing these same characteristics in their classroom? And can you share an example?
Sure. This is Robin. I can share an example.
Thank you.
Today we did our first group project. And so we go over a team charter and what's involved, and they have to determine who's going to be in charge. And that person has to decide the leadership style that we've gone over that they're going to use and make decisions.
Excellent.
And it's fun watching them, especially the first person in the team, struggle. By the end of the term, when everyone's had a chance to lead, it's a little less daunting and people step up a little easier.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great example. We'll see that a little bit more too in our next, there's a quote here by a famous executive about like collective decision-making and then ownership among teams. But I think you've alluded to that really well. Thank you. Anybody else?
So this is nursing, and we actually do sorry, my dog wants to participate. We actually do simulations.
Okay.
And so this was, and again, it's one of those things that they have 4 of them throughout the 15 weeks, but the first one is always sort of unique. They
Mhm.
are given roles, but it's interesting to sometimes see who rises to the leadership role, even though they might not have the correct information. But
Mhm.
for some reason, the other 4 sort of bow out to them because they're either more assertive or more assertive with confidence.
Mhm.
And so we'll be watching these from a blinded area and just be like, well, why are they letting her just make all the decisions? And then I think as they get more confidence down the line, they all start to sort of understand that leader role. But it was quite interesting to watch who gets it the first time.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. One of our other competencies that we touched on the first semester was collaboration. So I heard you mention some of that also. Great. Anybody else?
The one that speaks out to me the most is seeking out leverage. Sometimes, especially in healthcare, the ones that are in leadership roles are not down in the trenches every day. So before decisions should be made, it's important of a leader to seek out and leverage that feedback from their employers before decisions are actually made, so they can be informed to give the right direction as far as purchasing new equipment or big purchase items or big things that change our dynamics, to make for sure that they hear what's happening on the ground and they can respond back in real time based on that feedback.
Excellent. And also I heard you say is getting all of the information so that they have an informed decision, maybe not being impulsive and maybe not acting alone, working as a team. Excellent. Great. These are awesome perspectives. Anyone else? These are great. Well, thank you all for sharing what you're seeing too in the classroom with your students. I knew that there would be correlation because you all are definitely preparing students for the workforce. And what our employees are telling us, our employers are telling us, is that they will teach students the actual skill or the job. That's what they've told us already. But it's sometimes these soft skills that they sometimes need work on, not necessarily leadership. Some of the others that we've seen earlier, communication is what they tell us the most. That is the number one most important skill that they are looking for. And that comes in the form of everything you can imagine: verbal, written, nonverbal, interpersonal communication. So that's really what we stress. Okay, any other thoughts on this? One last point before moving on. Many companies have leadership training programs. And so as we mentioned before, you all agreed you don't need a title to be a leader. We also agree, companies also agree, but we believe in professional development for candidates and applicants as they move along. So do all of our employment partners. But, you know, as candidates seek initiative and they want to move up in their trajectory, there are these leadership training programs. And so what an opportunity for people to take advantage of that. And so as you all are preparing your students to graduate and move along, it's great to encourage those things, to never stop learning, to always take advantage of those programs that are available, just like you all are doing today. So next, what might leadership look like among teams? And I'm sorry, Ellen, did you want to say something? I saw you come off mute. Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, I must have hit it by accident.
Okay. And if your dog would like to participate, we are fine with that. Okay. So depending on what type of profession our students go into, we've got some healthcare folks on here. We've got other programs as well, but inevitably they will be part of some type of team. Very rarely are we creating future professionals to work in isolation. And that's just not the way it is. But taking a look at this quote here, and my bar here's in front. So this is the president of the National Association of Colleges and Employers. I highlighted some words that stuck out to me, but how do you feel in reading this quote? You can think about your personal experience. You can think about it from a student's perspective. Karen, also feel free to respond.
I'm really struck by that mission focused piece and just that idea of like, why are we here? What's the point? And making sure that you're kind of, again, keeping all of that energy that can come from a team moving in a coordinated fashion.
Mhm.
And I'll take the opposite role, Karen. The best teams that I've always been on had fun being together. So you work hard, but you realize that we can all have fun at the same time. And so that's a big part of having a great team too.
Awesome.
I like the
Another aspect of that is also the duration of the team and how often that team continues to get together. In some professional organizations, I've not had that here at Reynolds or in VCCS for that matter, but in some organizations, the leaders lead the team in such a way that by the end of whatever tasks they're working on, they don't like each other and they're not working together again. And in some cases, that's almost an expectation if you're in a workplace where basically everyone's job is a temporary job and you only work there for just 2 to 5 years or so. An environment like Netflix. And again, I'm not saying that Netflix is adversarial like that, but if you work in a company like Netflix, they actually tell you on your orientation, don't expect to be here in 10 years. That is not our culture. That's not the industry that we're in. And that's not the culture of Netflix. So.
Wow. Interesting. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. And what do you all think about that type of scenario?
I, of course, certainly prefer, just to be clear, I want to clarify with everyone before we move forward. I actually do prefer environments where an element of enjoyment and civility is something that is promoted, but it has to be promoted by the leader has to play a role in doing that. Certainly, people who are not designated leaders also play a role, but the leader must also it's essential that they play a role in that. So I just wanted to clarify. I wanted to clarify that, but
Sure.
I would like to add that in leadership, in creating a team, just like how we create a class, we have to be focused, but we also have to teach the team the different aspects of team building and team disassociation, because there are different steps that you go through when you're part of a team. And if everybody realizes it and realizes their role, I think it makes a better team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. There are different facets of every workplace, just like there are different types of education. We heard from Dr. Pando just this week that the types of students who are attending Reynolds right now, there are more students attending online and flex versus attending in person. That to me is a microcosm of how people are interacting with their work environments. For example, more people want to work at home than they've ever wanted to work at home before. You might equate that to what happened during COVID. There could be any number of factors. And actually, a young person that I spoke with just yesterday about the type of work they wanted to do, they had been in the health professions field, but now they want to work at home. And it's interesting how the trends in the job market are changing. And so whenever I equate that to leadership and teamwork, we just need to reflect on that and just be open and just be open sort of to our mindset with how we're engaging in those conversations. Leadership and teams, they've changed in what they've looked like. Even how we interact with people. Sometimes people want to be in this type of Zoom setting all the time. And to Brian's point, sometimes people want to be in their work setting for 2 years or 5 years and then move along. So we just need to be understanding and cognizant of that. And it's just different. Need to have an open mind for it. So it's different. Now, this is the CEO of Asana. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's a huge tech platform for organizing your teams and how you do your workflow. I'm sorry, I thought somebody came off mute.
Draymond, did you have a question? If not, I think you're just off mute, so.
And I'm sorry, I will speed it up a little bit. And Karen, please feel free to
Yeah.
scoot along too. Okay. Okay. That's fine. That's fine. Just in general, the summary of this is that every single person on the team has the same leadership capability. That's kind of what we wanted to stress here. What I wanted to pull out from this image is that I was thinking of an organizational chart sometimes that we see that looks like this. But this, it's more parallel. You can think of that. Sometimes, depending on where our students go into the workplace, it may be lateral or it may have that traditional pyramid. And as you're engaging with students in those conversations, it's okay for them to ask questions and explain the hierarchy of what a traditional or a different kind of structure that might be. But a Pew Leadership study does confirm that when employees feel comfortable in the leadership structure, they are more likely to take initiative, which is very important. This was in a healthy workplace culture. Employees are more likely to be collaborative and more likely to care about their work, as opposed to, we can think of the opposite. If the workplace is not healthy, what happens then? It's not on the slide. If it's not healthy, people don't come to work.
Not feeling good.
Right, right. They're not feeling good.
Don't
People
like
don't come
their
to work.
job. Right. Angry.
They're angry. The environment could potentially be toxic. And then you have a higher attrition rate.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do have a higher attrition rate, the company itself has to invest so much more money in posting jobs, employing new people, and then going through new onboarding processes, which is a huge expense. So I bring this information up to say that as you all are preparing your students to go through my office and then to get employed, it's very important that they are aware themselves of finding the right fit, and that if they are not happy and healthy in their workplace, to self-advocate. If workplace cultures are not healthy, then there are resources for them, including using their own voice, exercising that leadership. Okay, but down to the nitty-gritty. What are the qualities our employers are looking for? These are the real things.
And so, Laura, these are what employers are saying they would define leadership qualities to be?
Yes. There are many more things that could be added to the list. I did a survey of our employer advocacy or our employer advisory committee that meets every month. And these were the top 12.
So these are our local folks.
Are local. We
Yeah.
have about 102 partners, but about 28 meet every month. So my question for you all is, can you see where any of these are reflected in your work with students?
Right, we're getting some yeses in the chat. I think absolutely, you know, everything from completing assignments on time and working with others. The ideas of reliability and character, part of that is just, you know, students coming to class on time, being what we, I think, would define as a good student, right? But ultimately, those skills also lead to their success in the classroom as well.
Exactly. Oh, sorry. I was trying to scroll down in the chat and I went too far. Are there any additions you all would make? Maybe that our employers didn't think of?
What's number 12?
Let me move my screen. Oh, good point. Thank you. Self-advocacy.
I like Maya's comment in the chat about leading by example is a large part of tutoring roles too.
Yes.
And so that's a great place where students can capture some of that experience.
Yes. And I think of self-advocacy if you have a student who needs extra help, who's struggling, and they come to you on their own, they ask for that support, and then translating that to the workforce. If they don't understand something, maybe they need help with a task, and they go to their supervisor and they ask. You know, some people are deathly afraid of that. They're too nervous. They don't want to seem like they don't know how to do it, but we all need help sometime. And if we encourage that at our college level, then students are more inclined to, and if we really validate that self-advocacy, then they're more inclined to do it in the workplace. And all of our employers say, yes, I'd rather them ask.
I think employers are looking for people that like to think outside of the box.
Yes.
They want people that are easily to adapt to a new procedure or a new protocol without balking, without saying, no, this is the way we always have done it, but think outside of the box. It's like, I know that we do it this way, but this may work if we do it that way better. We have to always constantly be changing, and employers are looking for people that are easy to adapt to change.
Yes.
They're able to move with the flow and come up with great ideas of innovative thinking.
Awesome. So I'm hearing you say creativity and flexibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
As well as innovative thinking, you know.
New ideas. Yeah, that's great.
I'm focusing on the reliability issue, just because in healthcare we're hearing about people who are not reliable. Laurie, you and I were somewhere where the person didn't even show up to the interview. So how could you start a relationship like that? And also, if they hear of something or another occupation, not another occupation, another job that pays 25 cents more, they might either take that job or they might come into you and say, hey, I'm only coming 2 days a week.
Right.
What is that? What is that? They're not reliable.
Right.
You're losing some of that. Or I want to work from home.
Right. I agree completely. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for these comments. And I'm sure we could probably add our own list for sure. This was just a quick example because some students have said, you know, well, how do I get to show these things? You know, yes, I have my resume, I have my cover letter, but how will I actually be able to show someone interviewing me that I can do these things? And you also have your references, don't forget. That's been something challenging for students to come up with, but this was just an example, sample interview question, sample response. And then, again, I kind of want to move along here and get to Karen's portion.
I think this is a key point, though, is that a lot of times students may recognize that they need to exhibit something like leadership, but they don't have the title of being a president of a club or something. And so one of the things that we can point back to or help our students recognize is that what we're doing in the classroom are examples of those leadership skills.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
Before you move on, I had a student who was a mother, a stay-at-home mother, and she says, I have no leadership skills. So how do we ask her pointed questions that could illustrate leadership skills that she can identify and put into her resume and talk about in an interview?
Well, excellent question. Thank you for asking that. So if I were in your case, and what I would do is this slide right here, I would share this with my students and I would say, this is what employers are looking for. Let's think of a time together that you have done this and let's write it out. You know, because the best thing students can do is interweave examples of these in the form of storytelling. Like, yes, it can be on the resume, but you can't write out a whole story on your resume. That's why this example was a good one. You know, you incorporate the actual thing that you did. Like in this case, I earned my Associate of Science degree at Reynolds, but I also, you know, helped this student, which demonstrates selflessness. It demonstrates your academic prowess. But then it also shows that you're willing to offer the additional support. And that's leadership. So what you would do then for this student is just encourage them to think of times in your classroom that they have, that they've demonstrated these examples. I would get them to write it down, be thinking of it, so that when they get to the interview, they can pull from those specific examples.
And Phyllis, I've seen news reports on some of the challenges that mothers who have stayed at home for a period of years have had trying to re-enter the workforce, and how women get penalized for that much more harshly than men do when it comes to their job searches, which is very unfortunate, which is not something that should happen.
I agree.
So that's the importance of, you know, crafting the resume and the cover letter, and then highlighting the marketable skills. Yeah.
So Phyllis, I would say that you can certainly have that initial conversation, but then send her to Laura for some additional help and brainstorming.
Thank you for the shout out. Yeah.
Thanks.
Awesome. So just real quick is once your students get jobs, the skills will be measured black and white without a doubt every single year, just like we all are measured, and it won't be qualitatively. They'll look like this or some other form of performance evaluation. And it's either going to be a checkbox, it'll be a rating system, it will be, it might be a conversation, it might be a narrative, but the skills may look something like this. But sometimes for students, or candidates, it's a challenge to demonstrate those. That's sometimes where the nerves come in, you know, and your gut is churning and you're trying to pull out a portfolio that people don't look at anymore. But you're like, how do I show that I'm a leader, or that I have all of these other 8 competencies in an interview? That's what we practice. We write the resume, we do the cover letter, we try to incorporate relevant stories based on their questions. But when people get the job, this is how they're evaluated. Here's another just random sample. And then, in the meantime, though, thank you, Karen, for giving me the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went over.
You're fine. You're fine. So one thing, just kind of thinking about this, it's a little bit, it's kind of related to what you were just showing. One thing that I think a lot of us as faculty can do for our students is to consider the fact that many of us have some industry experience, and we've been evaluated at jobs in lots of ways. So those forms that Laura was just showing, sometimes students are just like, just showing them something like that, that this is what employers look at and look for and how they would evaluate you is just good feedback for them to know as we go through stuff. So shifting gears a little bit, Laura's given us a nice foundation of what those employers want to see. And so we can think about then as faculty, what we can do in our spaces, in our classrooms to help prepare students build these skills through the course content that we offer. And so I think that fundamentally there's the different types of activities we assign. And I think particularly for the leadership competency, I think group work really serves well for that. Certainly when we think about group activities like discussions, this is a great place to insert that. So if you are in a humanities course where you're discussing a text or a particular period of time, say in a history class, but even in a science lab, you might be discussing a paper. One of the things that you could do is assign someone to lead that discussion for the day. So the idea is that the students would be responsible for coming with questions to pose to the rest of the class. And that's kind of a challenging thing to do. Perhaps you could have a meeting with that student in advance just to go over the questions they developed, so you can vet them before the classroom discussion begins. But it's that idea of allowing a little bit of ownership of the classroom for the students. You can also do this in online asynchronous courses, particularly on a discussion board, if you allow students to create the prompts that are used to go through the texts that you're discussing or whatever else you are addressing in your discussion board. Another great example might be, again, smaller group discussion leads. So one thing you can do in Canvas in discussion boards, it doesn't have to be for the whole class. You can actually create smaller groups. So you can break students into groups of maybe 3, 4, or 5 students. And within those, you can have individual group leaders that might report back out to the whole class in a larger class discussion board. Or again, in a face-to-face or high flex situation, you can also have those small groups and have a leader essentially report out. One thing to keep in mind, though, as you're working in these groups, I have a tendency to want to think about, again, all of our learners and think about those introverts versus the extroverts. I think there's a tendency for this perception that leaders are extroverts because they're the ones that are going to put themselves out there, the first ones to step up and step into that situation. But the idea, like we were talking about before, is that we need leaders of all kinds, and the whole team is important to consider. So one of the thoughts is to think about different roles that can be played in these different discussion groups, because one, that allows folks to understand that all parts of the team contribute to the whole, but it also helps the leader see that they need to sort of manage some of these different roles. So examples in a discussion might be an equity monitor. An equity monitor would be someone who is making sure that everyone in the group has an opportunity to speak or contribute to the conversation. They can also be the one that sort of calls somebody out if that's getting a little bit inappropriate in terms of language. You can have timekeepers. I mean, that's essential in any sort of discussion because you want to make sure you're getting through the content in a timely manner. You can also have a note taker. So if there is going to be that one leader who is reporting back out to the group, the note taker can be the one in a support role. But again, equally important because they have that piece of needing to listen. So all of that teamwork does contribute back to that ultimate leader position. One other thing that's not listed on the slide here, but we can think about is the idea too of stakeholder roles. I made a comment earlier in the chat But a great way to think about teaching leadership is in a case study, or perhaps a scenario that you might have in a medical situation. The idea of assigning different students different roles in that situation, of the different stakeholders that might be in place. So for example, I have a discussion board in one of my classes where students are looking at sea level rise in Norfolk. And so we might have the city officials that might be contributing some to the conversation. We might have property owners, we might have insurance companies. And so the idea is that even though all of these people are coming with different perspectives, they are ultimately sort of leaders in those different ways, and we can see how they intersect. Next slide for me, Laura, please. Other thoughts about classroom activities? Certainly, the process of peer evaluation is a great opportunity for leadership because, again, most leaders do have to evaluate or assess their teams. And so practicing this idea of how to evaluate peers and colleagues is key. Now, one of the things that I think I know I have struggled with is I never really tell them how to do this. And I would bet that my English faculty and colleagues are a little bit better at this because it's a more regular thing in their courses. But one of the things to consider is how to first show students to go through that peer evaluation process, how to do it well, and then to actually encourage them to do it on assignments. One way to also make that peer evaluation process a little more valid for students is to add their voice to the assignment development. So I'm not saying that they're creating the whole assignment because you have learning outcomes you've got to meet, but what you can do is actually ask the students, well, what do you think is important? What do we value in terms of the way that this information is being communicated or taught? And kind of go back to some of those aspects that we were talking about earlier with the traits that employers are looking for too. Finally, one other thing I would say is, again, asking for those demonstration volunteers. Now, again, this is one of those things that's a little bit more leaning towards the extroverts, but again, it's another opportunity for those folks that really always want to step up to participate and have a space in the classroom. And so that idea of being able to be willing to get up and to be vulnerable in the class is always a great option. I have one that it always surprises me. I use a slinky to demonstrate different types of seismic waves that come from earthquakes. All they have to do is come up and hold a slinky, and I tell them that. They always are so scared. It's like, you literally used to play with these. I promise it's going to be okay. But again, that idea of just encouraging students to, again, participate in that classroom activity is always great. Next slide.
Student,
yes, Brian,
Karen,
go
do
ahead.
you mind if I make a comment, please?
Sure, go ahead.
So there's a change in the dynamic of your classroom when there are some students who act as leaders. Selfishly, for us as educators, actually makes our job easier. Because if there are students in your classroom who are leaders themselves, then they can help you to carry the momentum of the class, and other students in the class can look to them because they view them as more of a peer. And so they can uplift the courage momentum of the rest of the class, and they can and it acts to reinforce your leadership as the educator in the class. So the students who do that really are doing you, they're really doing you as the educator a favor. And it kind of reminds me of a chapter in John Maxwell's book, The 21 Laws of Leadership, where it says to grow, lead followers, but to grow exponentially, lead leaders.
Mm.
If
Yeah.
you have multiple leaders that you yourself are leading, then it's going to make it will make the people themselves grow personally, and it will make accomplishing whatever your objective is, it'll happen much better, much more harmoniously, much faster in many cases, and in a much more fulfilling manner.
Awesome.
And you'll get even more done than what you would have otherwise.
This is such a great point, Brian, because the whole social dynamics of a classroom are really interesting. And I think you're right that sometimes it takes that one person to sort of break the ice
Change
for
the
the rest of the
momentum.
class. And the thing is, I think it's really particularly important to find those sort of student allies in the high flex or online classes in particular, where you're really trying to get the student engagement to increase.
Mhm.
One last thing I wanted to point out is that we as faculty, we ask students to do things in our classrooms, but we can also encourage our students to do things outside of the classroom, but still within the context of Reynolds. One thing that I think that we can certainly do is, again, highlight this self-advocacy piece and really encourage students to reach out and use campus resources. And by that, I mean everything from the libraries to Math Central, to the writing studio, to career services, to being willing to step out and use the food pantries if necessary, reach out to other single stop resources. The key here is that, one, we as faculty can supply the information, but the idea is that if one student takes and uses these resources, like, yeah, I really got a lot of help from Math Central, then more students may potentially go. That whole power of peer pressure, right?
Mhm.
I think that participation in student groups is another key way. I mean, clearly, if you're serving as an officer within those groups, that's one thing. But even just being a presence on campus, participating in those activities is a great way for our students to get more involved and to see in action some of the teamwork we've been talking about. And then finally, one of the other things that I encourage you to point out to your students are things like PTK and other student life opportunities. So PTK, the Student Honor Society, or Phi Theta Kappa, they actually send out invitations to students every semester who meet the minimum GPA requirements. It's a 3.3. And so the idea is that many times students are a little bit confused when they get those letters or invitations, like, what's this all about? But if students come to you and ask about it, please encourage them to explore it further, because it's a great opportunity for them to engage with peers, but there's lots of leadership development programming through that particular organization. Likewise, there's lots of stuff on the calendar for student life opportunities. Even just today, we got a great internship opportunity sent to us by Ben Cowman. If you have students who are interested in international affairs, take a look at your email from today. But the key here is that encouraging students to fully take advantage of what Reynolds has to offer is another way that they can start to build out some of these leadership skills. So go ahead to the next slide.
I was gonna say just one quick addition to that, Karen. Thank you for that segue. So we also have with our new Instagram, and I will encourage every single one of you, please, to follow us. It's at Reynolds Careers. The benefit of building your network is really immeasurable. And for students who come to class and then they leave or attend class online and don't get involved, that's where they sometimes find that their resume is kind of sparse. So what you've said about becoming involved in that community, I can't stress enough. If you aren't a leadership position, that's totally fine. But still being a part of the campus community, you never know what kind of connections you're going to build. Also learning about other students on campus, getting to know people from different backgrounds, you build and make those connections that are really crucial.
All right. So at this point, I think we can just have a little bit of open discussion. Does anyone feel like they're doing some really cool leadership stuff in their classrooms? I'd love to hear about some examples from across the different disciplines we have represented by the participants today.
This is Robin. I'll go.
Sure. Thanks.
I teach business, and one of the areas in business is every 3 months for a new employee or annually to be able to do employee reviews. So within one of their group projects, actually more than one, they do a formal review of each of their team members. And then in a related area, they do what's called a 360 review. So they review their supervisor's performance, and in that case, me. And they have to include at least 2 areas no higher than mid-level and include ideas for improvement.
Nice.
And it's always a little rough to read them, but their ideas are wonderful, and I've done my best to incorporate everything I can that they've shared over the years that I've done this assignment. And it's really helped classes, and I think it helps students to know that their ideas are valid and being listened to.
Excellent. That's
Love
great.
that.
I know, me too. If I could just commend you, you said it's kind of hard to read. The putting yourself out there in that courageous way is so difficult, but incredible. And I love that you've done that. I think it is amazing to be so transparent like that with your students, and it's wonderful. Thank you for doing that.
But that's leadership right there.
Exactly.
Right. So wait,
Either they're being a glutton for punishment,
No,
which, the
that's
two can
leadership.
overlap.
That's leadership. It's awesome.
anyone else like to share an example of how they might have an assignment or an activity in class that exhibits or kind of taps into discussing these leadership qualities?
And she said that they can be tough to read, but it's very important to always distinguish and help your students distinguish in those situations between a critique over something that a person is responsible for, that they can control, versus things that are beyond a person's control, or even if it's not, even if it is within your person's control, the difference between a reasonable request and a reasonable expectation and an unreasonable one, which is something that I had to learn in medical school. In medical school, you learn the difference between a reasonable request and an unreasonable request. And if you honor unreasonable requests that are medically ill-advised, you can get sued, you can lose your license, you can go bankrupt. It's just not a good business practice as a physician. So it's important to distinguish between all of those things, and psychologically do not disparage yourself or get frustrated if students have a lot of expectations or critiques that are unreasonable or inappropriate.
Excellent.
Another great example of leadership. Thank you.
You are not going to please everyone. Not everybody has the same agenda as you. That's the other thing. I mean, again, an unreasonable request or an unreasonable expectation may mean your agenda is not the same as theirs.
Right.
Kimberly, did you have something to say?
I did. I was just going to point out something that was interesting to kind of think about as far as the healthcare field in general. I'm a med lab tech instructor. And when we have students go to clinical as a clinical coordinator, I hear, well, our new employees or employees don't feel comfortable in training because they don't know how to train or they're too busy to train. But we as instructors don't really spend the time teaching our students how to train. So we almost need to set up at the school level and engage our students to help them, give them the leadership skills to where they feel comfortable in training a new employee or training a new skill to someone. So this is where we can help in a laboratory environment by almost like you do one and then you show one, and then the ones that get it in your classroom, then they can go to the ones that aren't getting it, and you can almost see it. And it's the wonderful thing to watch in a lab whenever you have one student struggling and another student will just take the leadership role, and because they're already done with that task, and go over to the other person and help them through. And that gives them a very valuable skill, because then when they're in an employee environment and they are asked to train somebody, they've had the skills by doing it before in a safe environment.
Yes.
And they feel comfortable in doing the training. We do a good job telling them what to do, but we don't actually show them how to tell somebody else how to do it. And that's a very important leadership skill to train our students.
It sure is. And I'm sure you've heard of the train the trainer model. What a great thing to be able to have your students demonstrate those skills. So you teach everyone the same thing, and then you start having students demonstrate it, and then, you know, apply that knowledge in real life. And then, like you said, the more students get it, then they'll be able to spread it out. That's awesome. Thank you.
So we are getting to the end of our time together. So I am going to drop in the chat a link to a survey. This survey is to provide us some feedback on this session, just so that we can continue to mold and craft these as we continue through our series of the 8 different competencies. So please take a moment to fill that out. If you don't do it this afternoon, that's fine. You'll get an email about this tomorrow from CETL as well. So just be on the lookout for that, because we really do appreciate those opportunities for feedback. A couple of thoughts before you go. I'm going to drop a few other links in the chat. Earlier, it was asked, what about the competencies we covered last semester? The one I just sent is the flow recordings for last semester. And it's not just the career competencies, but other CETL events that we had in the fall semester. And this is where the spring ones will be going as well. So if you happen to miss one of our series, you can certainly join in via the recordings later. And then the last thing I want to share is the events calendar. So this is the college events calendar, but the filter has been applied so that you can see what is coming up for CETL. And this is specifically for the month of February, which starts on Thursday. And so if you take a look at that last link, you can see what's coming up in the next couple of weeks regarding CETL offerings, including our next session, which I believe is professionalism.
It is. And I'm sorry, while you're doing that, is anyone opposed to me taking a photo of our group right here for me to post on our Instagram? And if you aren't opposed, you might just turn it on your screen turn on your camera for just a hot second. We already lost. Thank you, Phyllis. Oh, beautiful faces. Thank you. Thank you. The rest, maybe just, okay, I'll take what I can get.
It's okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And if you haven't followed us, please, at Reynolds Careers.
Thanks for coming today. We appreciate
Thank
you.
you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.